I think there are quite a lot of issues we can now talk about with Andy Street, the twice-elected Mayor of the West Midlands. Very nice to see you indeed.
Thank you, to be here.
Now, you were, of course, famously before that the Managing Director of John Lewis. What did you make of what Tony was saying there about choice in bringing these changes in?
Yeah, so it won't surprise... I think I should say right at the beginning, I suspect I'm talking to the converted here, and I think there's going to be incredible agreement in this room through the day. The real question is, how do we get this message outside? But my straight answer to your question, Adam, and this won't surprise you because Tony's team have talked to me about this, is that what he said at the end is right, that we've actually got to make some legislative regulation changes so that the market does start to develop in this way. And the sort of trial that he talked about in terms of the blended offer coming through the gas pipes, and indeed then the option of proper hydrogen-ready boilers, that's right. So I hope what Anne-Marie Trevelyan will say today is we're going to bring forward the regulations to make that happen.
But in your area, in the West Midlands and Birmingham and surround, I mean, you took an initiative really to move towards net zero with a large involvement of hydrogen, which I suspect that was your decision, as it were. It wasn't what the voters were begging you to do, was
Well, it's very interesting you say that, Adam, because one of the things I'm actually most pleased with the way in which we've worked in the West Midlands on, and no politicians that sound conceited there and satisfied, you're always pushing for more, but we are pleased with the progress we're making. It's back in 2019, like everybody else, we declared our climate emergency. We set ourselves a target of 2041 for net zero. That was behind some, but well ahead of the national target. And it was given to us from proper research saying what is possible. It was not just a political ambition. It was, where's the plan for that? But the bit I'm most pleased with is we have put money on the table. We are making things happen across transport, domestic and industrial emissions. And we are not on target, actually, but we are well on our way. And recent independent corroboration puts us as the leading region in terms of delivering our plan. Not dreaming up a plan, anyone can do that, but actually getting on and delivering behind it.
I should say we will take some questions from the floor, so please use the app to put your questions in. We'll come to those later on in this talk. Now, let's just start, though, with home heating, because you have designated already a net zero district, haven't you?
We have. So I probably should just mention one thing, which I think you probably encouraged me to say in the previous question I didn't get to. So one of the areas we can make most progress is obviously in transport. And so we are already running hydrogen buses.
We'll get on to that.
I thought you meant that before. Aha. Let me just mention that now then, Adam, to go out of order, sorry. And what we have now got agreement to is actually this move towards having the biggest hydrogen bus fleet anywhere in the Western world, people say. 144 vehicles. It's still only, to keep our feet on the ground, about 7% of our total bus fleet, so there's a long way to go. But critically, it will make the market. It's sufficiently big to bring in private investors behind it. But you're also right, one of the things that local government can do is designate places, use the planning rules to bring together concentrations of innovation in one place.
So tell us more about this net zero district.
So we've done, there's two examples I'd choose for this. First of all, we have in Dudley what we call our net zero neighbourhood, where we try to say we're going to concentrate all different forms of energy efficiency in one place to try to prove that you get like the multiplier if you do everything at once. And then, so that would mean, it would definitely mean improvements to the energy efficiency of homes. It will also mean improvements to the transport network in those areas. And of course, it also means encouragement critically about people changing their behaviour. And I do think there's a role for the public authorities, just as Tony implied, to encourage that actually.
And when we come on to energy efficiency in homes and how people are going to heat their homes, very often people sort of pit, as we were hearing, the idea of heat pumps against the idea of solutions involving gas, either blending or full hydrogen. Where do you stand on that?
At the moment, I'm in the case of saying there are the trials should be running for different elements. Exactly the same in transport. To think there is one solution for every application is just not right. So if we think of what's required for a heat pump, you're not going to get many of those in tower blocks in the centre of Birmingham. So, just that one sentence makes it obvious. You have got to think about different solutions for different situations.
So without getting too political, when Grant Shapps said yesterday he didn't think hydrogen had a big role to play in heating.
I think that's wrong. I would be where Tony was to say that we need to get quickly to a trial to demonstrate that. The science appears to be absolutely in support of that.
And what's the situation with your housing stock in your patch? Those that could work with heat pumps and those that couldn't?
The discussions with Cadent, because they are our supplier of gas pipes in our area, would lead you to believe that we could move to the sort of Whitby trial relatively quickly. I would like us to do that.
Now, there is this national pipeline being developed.
Yes.
This grid which comes up from the northwest, northeast,
Correct.
And goes around. Where's the West Midlands?
So the West Midlands is interesting in this because it's quite, in a sense, it's quite difficult for us to admit this is, Adam, because if we'd been having this conversation 30 years ago about energy production, we would be right at the heart of that. Where were the coal-fired power stations? Lots of them were across the Midlands. Of course, we are now not a major producer of hydrogen. It's going to be done on the coast, and we are going to be a major user of hydrogen. So the whole idea of this hydrogen valley to supply us is critical. But that does not mean the West Midlands isn't at the leading edge of hydrogen technology and application. And this is where we've got to step forward and say we've got a different role to that you probably heard from Ben yesterday and you'll hear from Steve this afternoon. So a lot of what you might call the R&D is being done in West Midlands universities. We might talk about that. And a lot of the heavy engineering history of the Midlands is being used to think about, you might call it the total hydrogen supply chain. And if you just think of the major headline sponsors here today, Cummins in Daventry, Bosch in Worcester, Cadent in Coventry, there's a concentration of these resources in the Midlands, but we are doing a different thing to the producing areas.
So as far as a sort of nascent grid is concerned, you're at the consumer
We are
endpoint.
In this element of it, yes, we are, yes.
And you talked about your buses already.
Yes.
Over 100 of them.
Yes.
Helped partly by direct government subsidy.
Yeah, I think there's a really interesting principle here, Adam, because you see this often when any nascent market has got to be made. So for this bus investment, let's be clear. First of all, it's a private sector company that's taking the majority of the risk. National Express, in our case, Birmingham-based company. There is then a small amount of money from us as the Transport Authority, and there is money that we had to bid for from government in a competition. It's about a quarter of the money coming from government. Do I think that's an appropriate use of public money to test this market? Yes, I do.
And how are those buses, how are they getting their hydrogen?
Now, this is also interesting. So at the moment, our 20 buses are actually refuelled at what we call the Tyseley Energy Park, which is the second sort of cluster place in Birmingham, which is actually burning a lot of the city's public refuse. So it's from that source. But the interesting thing about this proposal with National Express is there will be a new local production facility, probably in Walsall. So this again is what I mean about it's enough to make the market. It begins to drive the supply chain. And I think that's what's attractive from a government point of view.
And what about the manufacturer? Because, of course,
yes.
everyone associates West Midlands with the motor industry.
Of course. So, it's a really interesting question because there's 2 points here. We do not actually make buses in the West Midlands. We do make a lot of components for the buses. So every bus made in the UK, the hydraulics come from a Tyseley company in Birmingham, but they will probably be made either in Scotland or Northern Ireland. But there is an interesting point in that hydrogen buses, a lot of the IP is in the UK. Electric buses, most of the IP is in China. So it is actually driving British industry more by moving to hydrogen rather than electric. But the other point you're perhaps moving to is this question about the rest of the automotive industry and the sort of heavy end of the automotive industry. And again, I agreed with the sort of hint earlier on that electric is not the only solution. We've got huge progress around electric vehicles, great for the West Midlands, but at the top end, it's great to see what JCB are doing, what Cummins are doing, actually thinking about how hydrogen might be a solution there. And this is where our universities are really on the cutting edge of contributing to this, particularly the Warwick Manufacturing Group and Coventry University.
And you've got a hydrogen fuel cell HGV project.
We have, yeah. And of course, interestingly, Birmingham University provided the first hydrogen fuel cell hydrogen train. So the research done with Porterbrook, again a private company, public and private coming together, hydrogen train there. And there's also a proposal around hydrogen air travel from Zero Avia based at Birmingham Airport. So
now
all elements we're there, Adam.
I mean, you were teasing me before about what did we know about hydrogen. Obviously, everyone in the room knows.
Yeah, you're the expert, not us.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, what is your perception as to the role of hydrogen in net zero?
And my perception is that it's mission critical, and that's why I wanted to be here today, and why I hope what we're doing, because we have to think about what's the role of the public authority. We have to try to stimulate this. I mean, let's be clear, the private sector is what will really drive this, but we can do some stimulating thing, and the government have to do some regulating thing to release industry, and that's the alchemy we want.
And do you feel that you are getting support from central government?
On some elements, yes. I'd like to see the regulation piece move on. And I would like, if I'm honest, I think in vehicles, there is definitely a tendency to electric is all solution. It is quite difficult to see how electric is going to be the most efficient solution for the heaviest vehicles. So I think there's perhaps a bit of work to be done by the hydrogen lobby to win government round to that a little more.
I mean, for example, I think JCB vehicles are not yet licensed to be driven on roads.
Correct. Exactly right. There's a perfect example of the regulation there. Yeah.
And do you get much interest when you raise this, or perhaps it's not top of your priorities when you're in Whitehall?
We've had to batter, and pardon me for using that rather emotive language, we have had to make the case really hard to DfT. There was some scepticism, but yeah, we won ministers round, actually. So I think, again, there is a role for local leaders to play in that, actually. Yeah.
And going back to what we started with, this idea of choice.
Yes.
What do you see your role as being, as far as your voters are concerned? Is it persuading them, leading them, or is it simply, following what they want?
There's three roles for the voters. The first, actually, is they want new industries in the West Midlands. I mean, let's be honest, our economy is having a tough time, given the move away from manufacturing and exporting, given some changes have been globally. So there's real interest in our voters in developing new industries. They actually want to develop the skills needed for this area as well. So I think that's another area we've not talked about, where a public authority can think about what practical training programs are in our colleges, so enabling those private businesses to develop. But the other thing they definitely want is to be given options, back to what Steve said, about how they actually deploy this new technology in the future. So I think we've got a number of roles with our voters.
And, I mean, you've been re-elected, so it has some appeal.
This goes back to your first question about net zero, when you said perhaps a surprising thing. That's probably paraphrasing words a little too simply, but I am absolutely clear that despite any other issues that there are at the moment, voters of the West Midlands expect their regional authority to be right on the cutting edge of this net zero challenge. And I think that, I'll be very blunt about this, I think if any national party steps away from leading that challenge, it will be punished for it. I'm absolutely clear. And particularly amongst young people, there's an expectation we do it, and that's why I've given it such priority.
And in your patch, at least, as you say, you are trying to link up the public estate with academia.
Absolutely.
And most importantly, the private sector.
This will only... let's be clear about this. The public money that can be spent on this is in the sort of, I don't know, tens, hundreds of millions of pounds. So the budget for the Advanced Propulsion Centre that's looking at the tech around this in Coventry is sort of 50 to 100 million pounds. That is tiny compared to what the private sector will invest in this. But it's about the power of that public R&D money to then leverage in the private, and that's the sort of mix we've got to get.
And do you find yourself very much competing not only with other areas of this country, but
yes,
with Europe?
We're very clear on this. So we have a number of task force groups on this, and some are represented in this room actually, and they're always saying to me, Andy, we're in a race here. The technology is portable internationally, and and it's exactly the same if we're talking about electric vehicle manufacturer. We're in a race, and so I'm absolutely clear that we have got to continue to put public money on the table to stimulate, and we've got to make it easy for a private sector to invest behind it. Yeah, definitely.
And do you find this is an argument that works with central government?
That's a really interesting question, and I'm going to give a very straight answer to it because I think credit is due where it's needed. It is much easier to make that argument in the last 6 months than it was in the previous 2 years. So there is absolutely no question that Jeremy Hunt believes in these new high-tech sectors, and he knows that there will need to be some public money put behind them. And indeed, Grant Shapps, as Business Secretary until very recently, was similarly of that view. Now, it's a slightly different point, but slightly different sector, but to illustrate it, if the rumours are true of the deal that the government has done with Tata over the battery factory, that is a really seminal moment, because that's the British government saying we are going to compete with the Germans and the Dutch and everybody else in terms of supporting these new sectors. And in a sense, it creates a really important precedent. That is Jeremy Hunt and Grant Shapps and Rishi Sunak.
Although that doesn't look like it's going to be in your patch.
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter, because it's in the UK. Lots of the R&D, most of the R&D is in our patch, the supply chain is in our patch, and the ultimate manufacturing.
Well, you did have the R&D for British Volt in your patch.
We did as well. That's the interesting thing. Everyone says British Volt was a Northeast company. The actual prototyping, the scale-up, the research was all based around Coventry and Birmingham. So that's fine. That is actually the high-end value-added jobs. But the point I'm trying to get to is that the current Conservative leadership is much, much more attuned to this than the previous laissez-faire regime.
And what, just on British Volt, I mean, what do you think of the lessons from that?
British Volt, the lessons... oh, God. It's a really simple lesson, but it seems very, very harsh when I say it. I don't mind saying, and it sounds clever dick after the event, I've told a number of people for a number of years, this is never going to happen. Don't worry about it. Because they didn't have any customers. And anyone in business will tell you if you're burning cash at the rate they were burning it and you don't have any customers, it is unlikely to succeed. The Tata proposal, which might be a second gigafactory and the first one at real scale, obviously has a key customer. There is, though, an opportunity for third, fourth, fifth, sixth and seventh battery factories, which of course have a link to this sector as well, because there's still a role to consolidate demand, not have it beholden to a particular automotive manufacturer. So the lesson is, where is the solidity in the business case from a customer point of view?
Now, tell us about Birmingham Airport and flights powered by hydrogen by 2025.
You have done your research, Adam, perfectly. So this is another innovative piece. So it's a private company, Zero Avia, and they're, of course, again, their mission is, as you say, to have flights out of Birmingham. They will be, because people say, think about the weight here. They will not be flying transatlantic. It's the short hop flights from Birmingham, Inverness, Glasgow, Amsterdam.
This is passenger planes.
Passenger planes. Those short hops for about up to about 100 passengers, because the weight ratio with hydrogen is working there. And the really exciting thing is, again, same point. Innovate UK is funding a lot of the research behind this, and there is a genuine view that, again, for net zero, this is a real opportunity.
And that will be okay with licensing by 2025?
I believe so, yeah.
And those are planes manufactured where?
I actually don't know the answer to that. I don't know. I'm not going to make it up. I have a funny feeling it's Brazil, actually, the answer to that, from what I think the model is that they're aiming to convert.
Now, we got the opening of the conference yesterday, when you weren't here, Dr. Needle talked about the importance of hydrogen in the sector where you used to be, in the retail sector.
Yes.
Tell us about that a bit.
I don't think I know about that. The importance in the retail sector. Well, there's...
In the manufacture of almost every product.
Yes. Well, there's an obvious point. If we move to hydrogen appliances, there is a vast retail opportunity there, and it's really important that, again, UK manufacturers get behind that. I think what you're really getting at, though, is if I was still running John Lewis and I was saying, let's look at our net zero credentials, one of the biggest issues was their transport fleet, and his retail moves more to an online piece. So it would be staring me in the face that actually how we convert our fleet, and the heavy fleet, again, little local delivery vehicles, that's probably done by battery, but the long distance Arctics, that is where I think the hydrogen opportunity really is. And I'll get this figure wrong, but of our carbon emissions, that was substantially the highest element, and it was also the growing element. So that's where I'd be looking.
I mean, I think she was talking about how actually in the manufacture of a lot of...
that's also
you need
true.
hydrogen, and in particularly
but our carbon emissions was definitely around distribution as the biggest element.
And it was also the use of hydrogen as a high heat source in things like steel making bottle making and the rest.
Well, that's another area where that we're looking forward to innovation. So if you again think of the West Midlands, think what's it famous for? Metal manufacturing, very high heat use. And again, we are working with government on a number of pilot schemes to move away from gas being the primary source of high heat to hydrogen. So you're absolutely right. There's applications there that we're, again, at this pilot stage.
Can you think of any particular projects you're involved with?
Oh, well, we have a live project that we call the Black Country Repowered is the project. It's partly funded locally, it's partly funded nationally, and it is about doing exactly what I've just said, move from gas to alternative forms of heating. It's a live project now.
Now, looking more broadly to the management of the economy, and obviously we've got a general election coming up and all the rest of it, where do you see an industrial strategy as being in that?
This is sort of where we went to with my observations about the Chancellor earlier on. So I have always believed that it is absolutely essential to an advanced economy that you choose the things you are going to be brilliant at, and you choose the things not just nationally, but actually each region is going to be brilliant at. And we'll explain this very bluntly. In the Theresa May, Philip Hammond, Greg Clark days, we all produced our industrial strategies by region. They were different for Manchester, Leeds, Birmingham, but we concentrated on what we were outstanding at. And picking up a question you asked earlier, it wasn't competing with one another, it was competing with Boston and Barcelona and Berlin and saying, where can we genuinely do that? And then you put all of your resources around the supply side of the economy, so what you're training in, what transport links you're providing, what your planning looks like, getting behind those sectors. We've done it regionally, despite the government moving away from it. We call it our plan for growth. We have 8 sectors where we think we've got a leadership position, and you put your resources behind them. The country is going to need to do that. Joe Biden's doing it. They're doing it in Germany. They're doing it in France. We must do it as well. And I'm convinced that the Conservative manifesto will be clear that they're moving back to that.
Because this Conservative government we've had recently, what they actually did was try and pit regions against each other, bidding for programmes,
Well, yes and no. They bid for I know what you're referring to, Adam. They set us against one another in what they call their Levelling Up Fund. Now, the Levelling Up Fund, frankly, was tiny. It was about 20 million here and there. And I've said this very publicly, the communication mistake on it was actually to make people think that was all there was around levelling up. Nonsense. If the government put 500 million, as reported, into the battery factory for JLR, that is a far more important decision around levelling up than anything else. And you have to make your choices like that. And then, again, not pitting against one another, we've now done our devolution deals with government. It talks about £1.5 billion in the next 2 years. That's the sort of sum that's coming. The Levelling Up Fund was, frankly, a sideshow.
And you mentioned Steve Rotherham, who we're going to be talking to later on, and also Ben Houchin in the Northwest. I mean, are these new jobs, like your job, the job of the mayor, you're working together across party lines, are you?
Yes. So I think... of course, if you've got a Conservative history against Labour history, you do the job slightly differently, inevitably, because you've got slightly different approaches. But the fundamental things about the job draw us together cross party.
And Andy Burnham, of course.
Of course. And he and I did our devolution deals together, negotiated with Michael Gove together, cross-party working. And Andy Burnham's been very generous in talking about that, actually. So the things that drive us together is this idea that a region needs its identity, its strengths, its investment, and it's exactly the same. The specifics may be different, but the principle is exactly the same in Greater Manchester as it is in the West Midlands.
And big question, since we're here, where does London fit into this?
Well, London has got a very important role in this, which we haven't talked about, which I think is one of the most difficult things. And if we were talking about retrofitting of homes generally, rather than just hydrogen, I would say this: London's the financial capital of this country. The financial markets and the asset management pieces have not yet adjusted to these new technologies. So there is a huge role for our financial institutions to do this. And I would love the people in the city down the road to be thinking about that as their unique contribution to this.
And is that an area where it's constructive to work with the Mayor of London, with Sadiq Khan, or
no,
not really?
Not really, because this is no criticism of him, but I don't think he would say that's his role. I think.
Well, I'm not sure he has the responsibility.
Exactly, he doesn't have that responsibility. We would be talking with some of the biggest investment houses in the UK about how they see. Because there's got to be a private sector answer to this. The government can't retrofit every home in the UK, however good the technology. There will have to be a private sector answer, and that's why we need to talk to those finance houses.
And let's talk a bit more about what you've got to offer hydrogen in the West Midlands in terms of manufacturing.
Yeah, so, they may not be technically in my area, but some of the biggest companies here are Midland companies. Obviously, we've given the names. But we've also got a supply chain that, indeed, some of them are talking about. Because whether it be hydraulics, thermodynamics, whatever, you've got all of the elements there in the traditional engineering supply chain in the West Midlands, which has often been used for automotive, interestingly, and will be pivoted to other things. And that's where I think our, frankly, unique contribution can come.
Andy Street, it's been fantastic. I see our time is up.
Please wrap up, it says. Thank you very much. You're on time, Adam. That's very subtle. Thank you. Thank you very much, Adam. Lovely. Yeah.